Hey there, thanks for taking the time and watching this today. I really appreciate it. If you haven't seen the first one yet, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's kind of long, pretty grueling, but I believe it lays a pretty nice foundation for understanding some of the other topics we're going to cover today, especially in the debate of evolutionary determinism. As I said in the first one, I based this entire miniseries off of, this two-part miniseries off of this book. It's called Improbable Destinies, Fate, Chance, and the Future of Evolution by Harvard professor Jonathan B. Losos. It's a fantastic read. You should definitely read it if you haven't yet. Let's recall some of the main points that I talked about in the first one. We know that convergence is the development of similar traits among similar species that are being faced with similar selective pressures. Birds and bats that are similarly related, they have a distant ancestor, and they both developed the ability to fly, just in different environments. Some scientists, like Conway Morris, see convergence as omnipresent, that you can find it in all walks of life, and he can cite tons and tons and tons of examples. On the other hand of the debate, scientists like Stephen Jay Gould believe that convergence is used as kind of an out to try to explain mechanisms of natural selection that we can't fully comprehend yet, that we still don't really have a great understanding about. Like I said, there are tons of examples of convergence. To name a few, bats and birds and pterosaurs are convergent. You get some things like the ichthyosaurus shark and tuna, for instance, have very similar anatomical body structures for swimming. But this doesn't change the fact that there are also a lot of evolutionary one-offs that don't have convergent species, or at least by the definition of convergence. And think like the New Zealand kiwi. Humans are a pretty good example. Or the platypuses. Platypi? In part one, I talked about two different scientists. Simon Conway Morris, who is the guy who coined this whole idea of convergence, and Stephen Jay Gould, an influential scientist in my life and just an evolutionary biologist. You may know him for discovering punctuated equilibria. That's one of his big studies. Conway Morris totally sees convergence as ubiquitous. He believes it's ubiquitous and that you can find it in all walks of life. He believes that it's the driving force of natural selection, and that natural selection as a mechanism of evolution is constantly working towards developing the most optimal solution to any given selective pressure. Take any two similar environments and you should be able to find very similar species in them. Stephen Jay Gould, on the other hand, doesn't believe this. He sees natural selection more as a tinkerer working with whatever already exists. So modifying anatomical structures and making good organisms instead of perfect organisms. Pretty good but far-fetched example of this would be like a duck. A lot of ducks will dive in the water to catch fish. Clearly, the most optimal path of natural selection for a duck would be for that duck to probably shrink, get a slimmer body for swimming, get rid of its legs. It doesn't need to be terrestrial. It could probably get fins and then gills, and before you know it, the duck looks like a fish. But that is horribly inefficient and probably couldn't happen. So instead, natural selection decides to favor ducks with better webbed feet because that is good enough for what already exists. The question I'm trying to answer, or at least work towards answering in this two-part miniseries, is would aliens look like us? Are humans, as of now, the most optimal solution to our environment being Earth? But first, to kind of get into this mindset and get towards this thought experiment, we have to ask the same question that so many late-night show hosts and Giorgio Tsoukalos asks. Are we alone? To try to at least answer this question, we have to really define what we mean by we in this context. When we say we, are we referencing life in general? If so, then we're probably not. Life has evolved hundreds of thousands of times on Earth over and over again, even in the face of five mass extinctions, and there are hundreds of millions of planets that scientists know of today that life could evolve on. So are we referencing complex life then? Well, that depends on how you define complex. If we restrict that to multicellularity, we can see that the most conservative estimates put multicellularity as evolving at least 6 times on Earth independently, but more liberal estimates put that up to 25. Single-celled organisms dominated the Earth for about 2.5 billion years before evolving multicellularity. You can see the endosymbiosis theory for that, but it seems inevitable that given enough time, multicellularity will evolve. hundreds and thousands of organisms have even evolved the same organs that humans have. For instance, like eyes, which our eyes are very similar to even that of an octopus, and hearts and brains of all various sizes, because they are required for the complex neural processing that humans perform. Loso says, this great repeatability suggests that multicellularity and complexity are an inevitable outcome of the evolution of life, at least here on Earth. If life has evolved on other Earth-like planets, we Earthlings may not be alone in our own multicellularity. Alas, clearly when we say we are referencing intelligent life. But what does intelligence mean? Scientists of all walks of life cannot agree for the life of them on what the definition of intelligence is. But looking at the most commonly accepted definitions of intelligence, we can see that even here on Earth, intelligence has evolved independently quite a few times. Dolphins are quite intelligent, actually. They're able to use symbolic speech to communicate their understanding of objects that were placed in their tanks. Elephants, too, have been proven to be able to move boxes into the best positions to reach food that is held above them. So clearly, elephants are no dumbos. And given enough conditioning and stimulus, even a mouse can escape a locked cage. Aside from basic problem-solving skills, or what we'd consider basic problem-solving skills, many animals have been able to prove that they are self-aware, such as elephants, dolphins, and magpies. We do this with what's called a mirror test. We will place a mark on an animal's body and put them in front of a mirror, and we monitor their reaction. Many animals, like your cat, will swat at the mirror, bite your finger maybe. Elephants, dolphins, and magpies have all touched them, showing that when they see themselves in the mirror, they recognize that it is them. It's their presence. Some of these animals, like the elephant, have even taken the opportunity standing in front of a mirror to open their mouths and look at other parts of their bodies behind them that they otherwise wouldn't normally see. Despite the incessant convergence of intelligent life here on Earth, we still don't know of any other species that's capable of the same degree of self-conscious introspection that we are, making us extremely unique in that sense. Some chimps in Senegal walk on two legs sometimes. They hunt with spears, and to a certain extent, they even communicate. However, you don't see them writing philosophical treatises on the state of nature. This uniqueness among our species on this planet, and to the extent of our knowledge so far in this world, is proof that we can't look here on Earth necessarily to make predictions about what life will be like out in space. Let's bring it back home now for a bit of a thought experiment. If you recall, in part 1, I had asked the question, what would life be like today had the asteroid not killed the dinosaurs? The answer is almost certainly that we wouldn't exist. But we can suspend that reality for a little bit and maybe ask ourselves, what species would have evolved if we hadn't, and would they have looked like us? Dale Russell had proposed decades ago that had the asteroid missed the Earth, leaving the dinosaurs to rule as they did then, eventually natural selection would have began to favor larger saurian brain sizes. This would have led to a myriad transformations that would eventually develop into what Russell believed would be a scaly green figure looking oddly similar to us. His claims were highly refuted in the scientific community. People believed that his design was much too anthropocentric. A few years ago, famous evolutionary biologist and author of Half-Life and On the Origins of Creativity, E.O. Wilson had made his own tentative list of what he believes are requirements, physiological requirements of a species on a different planet to develop an advanced society like our own. Wilson believed that a species would need to be terrestrial because the transportation of energy would be a necessity and can only happen on land. They'd need to be large because larger brains are necessary for neural compositions like ours. They would need to rely on visual and auditory systems for communication because they are the most efficient forms of communication over greater distances. They would need a large head on the front of their body to carry their brain. They would need to have jaws and teeth, but probably not overly large ones. The social cooperation required to develop a somewhat functional society like our own would certainly guarantee that hunting, gathering, cultivating would be done in groups as well. And they would need to procure at least some limbs enough to manipulate objects. His speculations met many of the same criticisms as Russell, but to Wilson's credit, it isn't actually that restricted. Losos describes a potential creature that could have a large stalk on its head, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle, be a 2-legged biped, have a small mouth and teeth, a pair of appendages on either side of its head, with 8 joints, 6 for movement, and 2 to manipulate the other 2 appendages branching off of it, with 7 joints of their own. Finally, I answer the question, would aliens look like us? Probably not. It's really hard to say. At the end of the day though, we know that evolution, natural selection, isn't haphazard. It's not completely confined to luck, but it also doesn't operate by a well understood set of rules. Sometimes similar organisms in similar environments evolve similar, and other times dissimilar organisms will evolve dissimilar. What we do know is that evolution happened as it happened. As Loso says, we are far from inevitable, but we are lucky to be here. Perhaps in a different circumstance, hominid life could have evolved prolifically. Imagine a United Nations full of bear humans, and rhino humans, and platypus humans, squirrel humans, rabbit humans, any kind of human, per se. It could have been. If you will, let me close this out with the final paragraph of Loso's book. From the vantage point of the origin of life several billions of years ago, any particular evolutionary outcome would have seemed improbable. But history happened as it happened, and here we are today, the result of billions of years of natural selection and the flukes of history that sent life down one path and not the others. Lucky? Yes. Destined? No. We should make the most of our evolutionary good fortune. I really hope that you enjoyed watching it. I know the first one may have been kind of hard to get through. I hope this one was a little bit faster paced and a little bit more enjoyable, and I hope it made you think a little bit. I mentioned quite a few books in this 2-part miniseries, and I would highly recommend reading them. Improbable Destinies, Fate, Chance, and the Future of the Universe by Jonathan Losos, and The Origins of Creativity by E.O. Wilson. They're both huge inspirations to me and the work that I'm pursuing in my life. If you liked it enough, please share it with some of your friends. If you've got anything nice to say, if I'm always looking to improve in different ways, make sure you go ahead and leave a comment and let me know what you think. Or if you want to make fun of me, I guess you could do that too. Thanks a lot again, and have a great day.